we should watch it and have dialogue and discussion. I know one of my friends on Facebook said that she watched it and had her son watched it, and she said her son watched it four times. So that was a definite. I don't know what to say about. I mean, well, what I can say, I'm glad to see that a young person wanted to look at this, because when I looked at the documentary, the first thing I thought about was my son. I have a black male son. Although he's 3 years old, I saw my son in those young men. I mean, because it was very, very, very heartfelt. It was very heartbreaking. But one thing that really bothers me, and also kind of sheds light on the whole situation, is you have people out here who says that racism does not exist, and privilege is a figment of someone's imagination. And I'm hearing people say this, but then when I watch this documentary and I have conversations with people who look like me, we know exactly what we're talking about. And also I noticed that when I have conversation about the documentary, when they see us, it's primarily people of color. I'm sorry, it is people of color. Now, I posted something on social media in regards to how I felt about it, and I've noticed that none of my friends who are Caucasian mentioned anything about the docuseries. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about it. I want to say that people who are Caucasian may not feel comfortable about discussing the topic of the conversation, because racism is a very, very tense powder keg that we're sitting on right now, and it will explode in a blink of an eye. But I think people do not talk about racism for a number of reasons. The ones that kind of stick out to me is primarily people want to avoid the discussion because it might start arguments or confusion. Or a matter of fact, some people just don't like talking about racism because they don't know what racism is. And I think when I say they don't know what it is, they can't understand other people's perception of racism. For example, and I don't like outing anybody, but however, I do want to bring light to one situation. I posted something about privilege, and a gentleman got on and tried to say that the way I see privilege, or the way we see privilege, is not how privilege really is. And then I sat and thought about it some more. And if you all are in the Kansas City area, you should be aware of the board president over at the Lee Summit School District. This gentleman's comments were very similar to hers, rooted in ignorance. And also, not only were they rooted in ignorance, it also made whatever discrimination that I felt and that people who look like me or who are in agreement with me felt or observed didn't exist. And that made me very upset. You can feel what you want to feel. However, your opinion should not remove any sense of discrimination that I experience. But I'm going to go ahead and dig in. I want to kind of dedicate this show to this young man, because it's obvious he has a very jaded view in regards to what racism really is. So this is dedicated to you. Okay, now, there are a lot of myths about racism that people like to throw out there. And, oh, wait a minute, I got a comment from T-Baby. Should make you want to know your rights and teach. Exactly. You want, kind of scrolling back, that docuseries does make you want to go ahead and know your rights and teach your children. For example, a little rabbit trail, there's a video going around about a gentleman who had his son have his ID and some other pertinent information on a lanyard, and when he got pulled over, he had them put on top of the car with his hands outside of the car, because he said he wants to teach his son to properly engage the police, so his life wouldn't be as threatened. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you for mentioning that, T-Baby. But back to what I was talking about in regards to myths. The definition of a myth is someone's perception or ideology on how things are. For example, the ancient Greeks had a whole bunch of myths. For example, Why are there spiders? One myth about spiders is a woman threatened to challenge a goddess. She lost. The goddess said, okay, you're going to weave for the rest of your life, turn into a spider. So some people actually believe that kind of stuff. So when I say that there are certain myths about racism that people believe that, just like most myths, or I'd say 95% of the myths, aren't true. So I'm going to go through some myths that people may in turn believe that give them a very, very jaded outlook on things in regards to racism, because the last broadcast talked about integration, and you have a lot of individuals who don't look like each other, who don't believe the same exact thing, or who aren't from the same place, who are in the same area. And when you are the minority, there are things that are said that some people who are in the quote-unquote majority feel that it's common speak, but that common speak is rooted in your oppression. All right, first one. Myth number one, racism is not our problem. Now, if you've heard that before, raise your hand. Now, the perspective can be seen in the question. Why do we have to talk about that? So when people ask why must they talk about racism, they in turn feel that racism is not their problem. That assumption is that, we feel we're not racist, therefore we should not talk about racism. Now, I come from the belief that what's worse than someone who is an actual racist is individuals who feel that racism does not exist, because you hold off and you do things that are racist, but you feel, okay, how is this racist? Okay, a helpful way to expand someone's capacity to see racism is that everyone's problem is to name some sort of implicit bias that people may not even notice. And when I say implicit and explicit is very obvious. For example, this is a bottled water, okay? Implicit is things that are implied. Well, if I'm thirsty, I'm going to drink this bottled water. So explicit is out in the open. It tells you what it is. Implicit is implied. So a lot of racism that we experience is, in fact, implied, hence the institutionalized racism or the passive oppression that we see in a lot of places of business or organizations. All right. Implicit bias, like for example, pulling your purse closer when you see people of color coming your way. A brother of mine experienced that this morning when he was at work. Feeling afraid or nervous when you're around people of color. Assuming that a person of color might be guilty of a crime. I'll say that again. Assuming that a person of color might be guilty of a crime when they are pulled over or arrested by police. Now, the individual who I'm dedicating this to, there have been several videos of police going very, very abrasive on people of color. And this person would always say, well, what did the person do? I mean, always coming up with that different scenario when it's obvious that something's not right. That's a form of implicit racism. Jumping to conclusions about a person of color stealing something that you may have misplaced. Or feeling the impulse to ask people of color, where are you from? Meaning a different country, when you don't ask white people the same question. These examples highlight the subtle ways implicit bias is still at work. I got another one for you. When you're in a classroom setting and you have children acting a certain way, and you label all children who look like that child in the stereotype in which you see, that's implicit racism also. Another way of framing racism as our problem is to identify the advantages that white people may experience. Now, for the individual who said privilege does not exist, let me explain something to you. Privilege is advantages that whites have over people of color. In America, whites have advantage over people of color. Now, let's see, what do we have right here? I had to debunk the myth of white privilege. White privilege does not mean your life is easy. It means your skin didn't make it harder. No, white privilege is exactly what I just got through saying. It's the advantages that whites have over people of color, and that does take place. For example, I strongly suggest you look at the documentary When They See Us. That is white privilege right there in front of you. And white privilege does come down to complexion. Because I guarantee you, if you and I were in a situation, just like Sharon Eichen just got through saying, hitting the locks on all doors when, in a black neighborhood, you will experience what I'm talking about. For example, when you look at your communities, don't you find it odd that crime has no address? But don't you find it odd that areas where there are more people of color, that the crime there is more exposed versus areas where there are people who are white? That's privilege. I mean, white privilege is not a myth. White privilege is a fact. Okay. Privileges may be different for whites who experience other aspects of their identity as marginalizing, but there are enough examples that is possible for even the most disadvantaged white person to be able to relate to at least one of them. So we got to take monetary value out of the area. For example, if you look at the book To Kill a Mockingbird, Tom Robinson was accused of raping Mayella Ewell. Now, Tom Robinson financially was better off than the Ewell family. However, when Mayella Ewell and her dad came up with the story to lie that Tom Robinson raped her, immediately their lower status was above him because he was a black man. And then in turn, in that courtroom scene, when Tom Robinson said, and I quote, "I felt sorry for her," the privilege then exploded even farther. How dare you as a black man feel sorry for a white woman? As if, pretty much saying she's greater than you. That's what privilege is. Advantages. All right. Myth number 2. Racism is about hateful actions and words. If racism were just about mean actions and words, then we could easily say this is not about us. We ourselves do not harbor racist beliefs or say racist things, at least to people of color. 2 problems arise from this alleged belief. The first is that it assumes that we are the best judges of whether we are racist or not. Note, I say that again, that we are the best judges of whether we're racist or not. Now, let me explain something to you. If I see, Mr. Walker is behind the booth right now. If I came in, and Mr. Walker wears glasses, if I came in and made negative comments about his glasses, and I got to watch what I'm saying because Mr. Walker is he's owner of the station. If I come in and say, "Hey, Four Eyes," and I'm meaning in a joking manner, but Mr. Walker is taking offense to it, I cannot sit up here and say that, well, he shouldn't get mad. I'm just cracking a joke. Well, I can't sit up here and I cannot be the evaluator of how I'm treating this man. If Mr. Walker tells me, "Tyrone, you are offending me," that should be my indicator to stop. Let's see what we have right here. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here? What did I leave off? Okay. The second is that it misses a whole world of data that shows less obvious factors in racial inequality and discrimination. Now, racism is more than someone calling a person of color by a terrible name. It is also seen in the differences in, for example, what we pay, housing discrimination, mortgage lending, school segregation, and rates of policing and incarceration. Now, I'm going to scroll back earlier. Someone made a comment and said that privilege does not exist. Well, in Kansas City, Missouri, there's a dividing line called Troost. Now, on the west side of Troost, you can get a house. Let's say 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and a 1-car garage. You take that same house and put it on the east side of Troost, with the same amenities, the house on the west side of Truce will in turn sell for a higher price. Why? Because the neighborhood is predominantly white, and there's not many factors out there that attract people of color. That is privilege. See, they'll tell you that it's the exclusivity. I want to be somewhere that's exclusive. Look at all these code words. Now, you know, I have a few coworkers that I work with, and they will flat out tell you in a heartbeat, yes, there is white privilege. And yes, I can benefit from white privilege. I choose not to. That's, you know, I mean, seriously. Let's see, we got some comments. So, of course, it's white privilege. Of course it is. Black means lower class citizen. Quit calling yourself black. Easy fix. Thank you. Let's see. A new report says 91% of black people are pulled over by cops. We've been knowing this for decades. So, think about this. If Kansas City, Missouri just got through saying that 91% of people who are pulled over are black people, you can't tell me that's not black. I mean, that's not some kind of privilege behind that. Come on now, think about that. I tell you, I mean, case in point, I live in Raytown, Missouri. I got pulled over for a tag issue. Okay, I respect that. My tags weren't on my vehicle. I get pulled over. As soon as I get pulled over, the officer walks over to my vehicle. She asked me about my tags. I said, ma'am, I just got my tags renewed today. Here's my documentation that my tags are done. I look over to my right-hand side. I see her partner on my passenger side with his hand on his gun. She looks at me, goes back to her car, calls for backup. Another vehicle pulls up. Now I have 4 cops. 3 out of the 4 have their hands on their weapons, waiting for me to make a move, all because of tags. Now, I understand that other people of color, that other people of different nationalities have issues with the police. But when you live in a city and the metropolis has a report that 91% of people pulled over are black, I mean, come on now. I mean, seriously. Now, I know some of the information that I'm going to give today may cause some tension, but when you give the truth does hurt. And also, sometimes the truth can enlighten you for more understanding. So hopefully you understand where we come from, not know where we come from, because you'll never know what it's like to be a black man, but you can understand what it's like when I talk about certain things. Let's see. I also talked about housing discrimination, differences in pay. I mean, there is discrimination in pay when it comes to gender, and there's also discrimination in pay when it comes to for race. There's a school district where I used to work where there are individuals who have less degree than what I have, and they have higher paying jobs than what I have, and they're white male. There are individuals who don't have any experience, but because they know someone, they have a job over a well-qualified minority. Case in point, there was a position that was open. A gentleman had credentials working in that position, not only in the civilian world, but also in the military world. However, a white male who knew someone got the position. And note, the white male did not have any understanding of the position. So that takes place. I mean, shoot, look at your president. Does he have any political background? I'm going to stop messing with Trump. Okay. I also talked about mortgage lending. I had a student teacher, a white woman, and I'm only saying this because I don't want people thinking that I'm making this stuff up. She came to me and she said, yeah, I used to work in the mortgage field, and there are actual clauses that are still in effect today that tells you who you can and can't sell your houses to. I mean, why do you think suburbs were created? Suburbs were created for whites to move away from blacks. Mortgage lending, at one time, if you sold your house to someone of color, the depreciation of your house value did, in fact, drop. School segregation. I sat there and said to an administrator that I work with, I said, if our school building was placed in a different zip code with a different demographic of children, all these problems would be fixed. He looked at me and laughed and said, yes, you're right. So he even knows that. I mean, look at it. Look at your school district, and you can't sit up here and say it was the people we elect. I mean, come on now, let's be real. Go beyond that. We all know that if it's a predominant, more than likely, if it's a predominant white demographic around a school setting, that school does not have the same problems as urban schools. They don't. I mean, look at Lee Summit. The majority of their school buildings is either brand new or they got brand